here in our organization, please wear a mask and remain 6 feet apart during the event. Your mask should be on at all times, especially if you are standing, unless you are eating and drinking. So please take care of one another and follow those basic rules. All right, so please welcome Lauren Baker, an exceptional speaker and an economist with ITR Economics. She is here to help us determine the best course of action for us in our businesses. Lauren graduated cum laude with honors in economics and a double major in religion from Wesley College. She has a stellar reputation for an attention to detail and an ability to understand the needs of each of her clients. Prepare to leave informed, and thank you, Lauren, for being here. And I had the pleasure of having a cocktail at the pool bar with her last night, and I think we're all in for a real treat. So everybody welcome Lauren.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. To be perfectly honest, I do a lot of events like this typically. This is my first one since March, so it's the first time I've been on a plane. I am so excited to be here. I've been just itching to get back out of my house. So thank you all for joining me. And thank you, Mose, for that great introduction. Now, I was going to start by telling you a little bit about myself, about ITR, but I realized that's not the point. That's not why we're here today. Really, I'm here to show you the data, because there is a very clear story in the economy right now. And the data is what is going to tell us where we are and where we go next. So really, I'm just the messenger. So I hope to give you today that data-driven, unbiased view of where we are, where we go from here. But I do want to start with a little bit about ITR, our firm. So we are a forecasting firm. I'll show you a lot of those forecasts today, but if you take one thing away from this presentation, maybe it's not even where the economy is or our forecast, but I want you to be able to use the data yourself. So I'll show you a lot of it. I will explain what I see in these trends, but I hope you can kind of go beyond that, and I want to give you the tools today to be able to do that yourself. So whatever I'm looking at, be it gross domestic product or maybe retail sales in a certain sector, maybe it's just your own individual company sales, I'm always starting with that data. I like to look at it on a monthly basis, so that's what I'm showing you here, some sample data set. Sorry, I'll move that box if it gets in the way. So I'm looking month by month. Maybe these are my own company. Let's call this Lauren Incorporated. Here's my sales data. I can do a few different things to manipulate this data. It's not high-level math, pretty simple calculations, to really show me what's going on here behind the numbers. So the first thing I'll do is I'll take my most recent month, and I'm going to compare it to the year-ago level. So September 2020 compared to September 2019, and I can see how much bigger or smaller am I than I was 1 year ago. I call this a 1/12 rate of change. The 1 stands for 1 month of data, over 12 months ago. How much bigger am I in this last month? But let's not stop there, because right, in normal times, 1 month of data, that could be meaningless. There could be one big project that came out this month, or maybe something got pushed from September into October, so September looks really bad. So I don't want to focus too much on the noise, right, the volatility in my data set. So let's smooth it out a little. I have a 3-month moving total, a quarterly total of activity. And just like I calculated that 1/12 rate of change, I'll do the same exact thing. Take my rolling 3-month moving total, and I'll calculate a 3/12 rate of change. So now this is a little smoother. I can see a quarterly activity. I can see, in this case, obviously things are not great right now for this business, down 3% from the same quarter last year. This does a few things. It doesn't just tell us where we are. It also takes out that seasonality, right? I'm always comparing a busy season to the same busy season last year, slow season to slow season. But let's take it one step further. Let's do that same exact analysis on an annual basis. So here I have a 12-month moving total. I'll abbreviate it 12 MMT. And just the same calculation, plug that into Excel, and I can compare my 12/12 rate of change. Now I'm going to come back to this metric more often than anything else through the rest of the presentation. So I want to be sure everyone's really understanding what we're getting at here. I'm looking at my trailing 12-month total compared to last year. Right now, down 4.4%. That's probably a pretty mild contraction, right? Only 4% down from last year. Some of us would be very happy with that number. But it's not just the annual. Things are changing so quickly in the world today, so quickly in the economy, that I don't just want to look at that annual figure. It's going to lag a little bit, right? I need to get a lot of new months of data after a change, after a shock to the system. So if we look at everything that we just calculated, there are a lot of numbers up here. This is a very busy slide, but once you understand exactly what we're looking at, you can start to pick out what matters. So if this is my company again, I look at my 12/12 rate of change down 4%, and it still is declining. That's very bad. In fact, we at ITR, we take that 12/12 rate of change and we plot it across this sinusoidal wave. That represents the 12/12. It might be positive, it might be negative, maybe it's rising, maybe it's falling, but it will always be in one of these 4 phases of our business cycle. So that last example I showed you, this company is in what we call phase D, or recession trend, where that 12/12 is negative and it still is declining. Things are getting worse and worse. I want to know that because I want to make very different decisions. If I, Lauren Incorporated, am in phase D versus, let's say, phase B, where growth is accelerating. But it's not just that immediate 12/12 rate of change. So I'll go back to these numbers. And if I look back historically, look at the 3/12, it looks like the most negative number came back in, what is that, May or June. That was when we had our low point, and then even though this is still negative, down 3%, it's starting to rise again. The 1/12, it's even more clear. That number, in fact, is positive 1% in September. So I'm getting a strong signal that my most recent data is starting to turn back up. So maybe that's a sign to me that I'm close to that low point where we crossed from the red phase back into the blue phase. So things will start to recover in the future. We're not there quite yet, but that's a signal as to not just where we are, but what comes next. So I would encourage you, run this calculation for your business. I'm curious, does anyone have a strong idea of where you stand right now? Do you know where your business is in this business cycle? Because even if you're down, maybe you're starting to enter that phase A recovery trend. So I hope you do go home, and those of you on the line, I hope you're still paying attention and not just running an Excel formula, because this is your own data. You have this information, and you can use it. I'm going to show an example. How do you use your own internal data? No forecast. I've done no assumptions or forecasting yet, but this can tell you where the low is coming. So again, hypothetical, company A. I'm showing many different metrics, so the slide's a little busy here, but you can clearly see the bottom set of lines where it says raw, that's just their monthly sales figure, and the 12-month moving total, that's the teal line. So you can see there are some ups, there are some downs. Obviously in '08, we see the Great Recession, they had a contraction. Looks like they had another little one here in 2015-16, and now here they are with the pandemic-induced recession. So things are down just a bit, but where is that low? Look at the top 2 lines. That's the rate of change signature, both a 1/12 and a 12/12 kind of smoothed out. They've got some bad news, right? There's negative, they're down 4.4% from last year, but look to the lows. That 1/12 has already reached the low, and in fact, checking point number 2, it has upward past the 12/12. That's their positive signal. If this is my company, I'm starting to get excited. Maybe I'm investing because I want to hit the ground running once we get that 12/12 turning back up. That's my signal that I need all systems set to go, that I need to really, really be ready to get out ahead of the competition, not still living in the past in that recession mindset. So this is one example. They've hit those first 2 checking points. We're waiting on number 3 when that 12/12 hits a low. For them, I would expect it comes this quarter, if not next quarter. Very imminent here, looking for that low point. Hopefully everyone's still with me. I will pause. Is this making sense? Any questions on the calculations? It's not high-level math. I really encourage you, go back this afternoon, give it to the intern. They're good for numbers like this. They can do the Excel crunching. But there's one more really critical component. This is only looking at one data set, your own data, or maybe your own sector of the economy, right? It's important to know, is your sector growing while your company isn't? That's a critical component that we should be talking about. But we can also use economic data to look at what comes next. So again, no forecasting. I'm only using hard evidence. And the blue line, that's the 12/12 rate of change for the company that I'm interested in. So we can see here they are in phase D recession, below the 0 line. But where does the low happen? The green line is going to give us a hint. So this is our ITR leading indicator. We calculate this every month. But we have about 10,000 different indicators in our database. So maybe I could look at retail sales. Maybe I could look at capacity utilization. There are a million different things that we can see are, first of all, highly correlated, right? So these 2 lines tend to decline together. They tend to rise together. But not just that, we have a little timing mismatch. let's look from peak to peak, from trough to trough. The lines just don't quite line up perfectly. So I'll calculate, in this case, there's an average 10-month gap between the directional movements in each of these lines. So what I'll do is I'll hold my blue line steady, and I'm just going to shift that green line straight across my x-axis by 10 months. Now I've moved it 10 months into the future. We can see the peaks align much better, the troughs align. Not every cycle's perfect, but in general, we see a much closer correlation. And even more importantly, I haven't done any forecasting yet, but I have an idea of what the next 10 months hold. I can see when this indicator made its low point. Timing-wise, maybe I don't have a full magnitude of decline. We see that the peaks aren't always the same height. But timing-wise, I know when I should expect, generally, for my own rate of change to turn that corner, to start picking back up. So we'll do this analysis with a bunch of different leading indicators today, and hopefully that will give you a sense, not just my opinion of when the economy will turn up, but that I do have hard evidence that there are already indicators turning up, that we shouldn't be here in this phase D recession mindset. That's in the past. We are almost through the worst of it. And my forecast is for the low point to come early 2021. So first quarter of 2021, that's when we hit that low. And by that point, I want you all looking ahead, because that is where you can make the most gains. Get out ahead of it. Get out ahead of that growth cycle. Obviously, we do a lot more than that at ITR. We do some forecasting, so I will show you a lot of those forecasts, and I'm going to give you the evidence. This is not just, like I said, my opinion or my firm's opinion. This is really the data that we're here to bring to you. Was that a question? Yeah. Yep. Yep, so the question is, for those who can't hear virtually, on the troughs, is it an external factor skewing the data? And the three that you pointed out were the pandemic more recently, the 2008 recession, the Great Recession, and you pointed out 9/11, I believe. That was actually, there wasn't a recession in early kind of 2000s, the early 2000s. That was caused by the dot-com bubble bursting. So we would consider that not really a 9/11 effect. It was kind of pre-existing at that point. So I would consider that just the regular, normal business cycle recession of the early 2000s. So you're absolutely right that, and that's why I include news and market observations as a critical component of what we do, because we're looking not just at that normal business cycle, but what are the other factors? Right now, the pandemic is a huge factor that's influencing all of these trends. It kind of knocked us off of our normal pre-existing course, and we refer to it as the black swan event because it came from so far outside the world of economics. Something like the '08 recession, even the dot-com bubble, there were fundamental economic reasons for those recessions. The one that we're in now, this is global health. This is not economics. So it hit us, kind of blindsided us, right? Coming from so far outside of our typical leading indicators. I'm not a doctor. I don't have any medical, training or ideas of pandemics. So that's why we're still kind of reacting in a different way. That's why we see, and yeah, this is a great example. We had been in actually a technical recession in the industrial economy before COVID struck. And you see, this is just a sample data set, but you can see that green line, our ITR leading indicator. It actually had been showing the normal business cycle decline ever since that peak came in late 2018. So decline here, it was slightly below the zero line, and it started to pick back up. That was our sign of when that recovery, the next accelerating growth trend comes through. And you see just how sharply March hit, and we saw that real quick elbow down. You're going to see that pattern in a lot of the data I show you. That's because COVID was not economic-based. That said, this analysis still works. We still have a 10-month lead time. We still have that forward-looking view from this internal data, and things will normalize. So in 2021, we'll recover, we'll correct, and essentially we'll get back on that kind of pre-existing business cycle wave. Thanks for that question. All right, so I want to move ahead to what the forecasts are. This is probably what you're here for, now that we've done that groundwork of the math and kind of the boring stuff. Obviously, the pandemic is the elephant in the room. Again, it blindsided us. No one saw this coming. There are no fundamental economic reasons for the recession. It's all due to those closures, to the pandemic effects itself. So we're watching it very closely. This map, unfortunately, is getting more and more red every time I update it. I don't like to see that because it's quite concerning from a human point of view. But as I explained to the folks at dinner last night, I'm an economist, so I'm not allowed to be a human. I'm just a robot here to show you data. I have no emotions. So as terrible as this sounds to say, I'm not worried about this chart. I'm not worried about the health outcomes, even the death rates, very concerning for a different set of reasons, but I will leave that for another speaker to have emotion. What I'm worried about from a purely economic point of view is the closures. Our country is slowly but surely reopening. We never thought it would be a perfectly smooth process. We thought there would be bumps in the road. But generally, we do expect gradual, more and more opening. We've seen some reversals in certain states. We've seen just maybe some pausing in others. But this is what I'm worried about. If a lot of this map goes back to orange, to reversing the closures, to re-closing down, that's going to be a major downside risk. I would say, expect a little day-to-day movement. Maybe there are capacity limits in place, right? Maybe you have to distance still. But if our country re-locks down to the level that we were in April, when we just weren't going out of the house, we were all really, really isolating and sheltering in place, you should probably expect some new forecasts coming out of ITR. This, to be fully transparent, is the biggest downside risk that I have for you today. But if that doesn't happen, if we do generally keep reopening the path that we've been on, the good news is we're really due for that low point, and we're seeing the evidence already. So the world is going to start to heal in 2021. The blue line on this chart, that's my 12-12 rate of change for the global industrial economy. So again, you see that deep V-shaped recession in '08. That was the Great Recession, a global recession. Ever since then, though, this line has been positive. So our growth rate has been positive, maybe a little quicker sometimes, maybe a little slower at others, but we've had a decade of really good, strong global economic growth until COVID hit. And here you see, we were actually in a slowing growth pattern, so that 12-12 was ticking down. Wasn't due to dip below the zero line, though. You see that elbow when COVID really struck the world. And the red line on this chart, that's my leading indicator. That's what's giving me hope going forward. So this is our G7, or Group of 7 Nations, leading indicator. And here I've shifted this forward 9 months. So that's why the endpoints of the data don't line up, even though they did occur in the same month. I'm showing you 9 months in the future, so 3/4 of outlook. Here we've seen that low. We're very clearly on the rebound. That line is rising again. That tells us it won't be a couple more quarters before we get that low for the global industrial economy. And we have many more leading indicators. That was just one example. If I'm tracking various countries, they've all turned to rise now. Doesn't mean their economies are expanding quite yet, but just that leading input is showing that rise will come soon. Here in the US, it's a very similar story. We are actually the largest economy still, so we're a large portion of driving that global train. In fact, we make up about 1/4 of global output on a GDP basis. Here I'm just showing the industrial side of the economy, but again, we are essentially one of the largest, the largest, and really one of the primary factors behind that global index. So again, we have the bottom set of lines shows the actual size of our US industrial economy. The top set of lines, that's showing my rates of change. The gray line is our quarterly growth rate. Teal line is the annual growth rate. And so yes, we are in a recession. That is negative, but look at my forecast points. We don't have much more decline to come. We are essentially at the bottom. The good news is here I've seen, and again, let's think back to the rate of change analysis, right? That 312, it's made a low. It's now starting to rise. We are just close to seeing those two lines cross. When the quarterly growth rate rises above the annual, in the next quarter, expect that low point to come. This is the strongest signal that I can tell you to watch for. And I get this data you see from the Federal Reserve Board. That's what FRB stands for at the bottom of the slide. This is freely available. Check when that growth rate crosses. When the 312 crosses above the 1212, that's my confirming evidence. I expect to see it really in the next month or two, but I don't have that data quite yet. So positive inputs from the rates of change, positive rise from even that quarterly activity level, that is giving me the confidence that we will see that growth picture come back. Now, I say that with a caveat, right? We will see growth again, and whenever I'm comparing that 12 over 12, I'm just comparing to 1 year ago. So we will get the recovery in 2021. We will have growth absolutely compared to the year ago level in 2022, but be aware that there will take some time to climb back out of this hole. If you see that 12-month moving average, the bottom teal line, it dropped pretty sharply during COVID, during the pandemic. We are down significantly from where we were. So if we think about a full recovery or a complete recovery, by that I mean the point at which we aren't just starting to recover, but we've actually risen back above that high water mark. So the size of our industrial economy has passed that pre-recession peak. We don't think that happens until the first half of 2023. That's still a few years away. That's the time at which we are not just making up the ground we've lost, but we're actually into an outright growth picture. So keep in mind, certain sectors will feel this for a lot longer. The airline industry, for example, or oil and gas, they were hit very, very hard. They will take more time to come back fully. I'll talk about the consumer in just a moment, but consumer spending is going to be one of the things really supporting this recovery. So if you are selling B2C, that is probably one of the best areas right now. You'll have the most robust and really immediate recovery back to that full economic recovery level. So something to keep in mind, and I'll talk to various full recovery metrics throughout the presentation. Now, the reason behind this, I told you we have strong evidence. That's not just our guess. We have the leading indicator evidence. Here's just a utilization rate. Essentially, this is a measure of the existing capacity in the US industrial economy, how much of it is being used. So, right, we had shutdowns with COVID. That caused a sharp decline in this line. But now it's starting to recover. It is showing those gains coming back. People are firing back up and getting back online. That's the good news. I've shifted this forward about 2 quarters, 6 months in this case, and it's very clearly compelling. The low point, that nadir, is really, really close. In this case, maybe even the risk is a little sooner than our overall ITR forecast. Maybe this is an upside risk for that recovery to be just a bit quicker to come back. So good news here, I hope. Not just from this one. This is a dashboard that we like to follow. I would certainly encourage you to follow anything on this list. We find that these dozen indicators have the most compelling leading indicator relationship to the industrial economy. And as of September, the last one flipped to rise, so we are very clearly seeing all signs point to go. Our economy should be firing back on all cylinders here, again, around year end with the lead time that we have to adjust these for. Now, I said I'd talk about the consumer. This is one of the most interesting parts of this recession, and I think this gets to your question as to why is this case different. This is in no way a normal business cycle recession. We haven't seen anything like this in the US, really in the world before. Part of the reason is the consumer. So the graph I'm showing you here is just the raw dollar value, trillions of dollars of personal disposable income. It's a pretty steady number, right? We all tend to earn about the same amount until we get a shock. And you see that shock came in March, but maybe not as you would have expected. So March is this bar that drops just very slightly down before we get April. And we see incomes actually spiked in April. Maybe not surprising when you consider those $1,200 checks all went out in April, so that was a big reason behind this surge. But very interesting is that trend continued. We actually had elevated levels of personal disposable income throughout the summer. My most recent data point is in September. So $1,200 checks, those didn't repeat. And in fact, by August and September, even those $600 additional weekly unemployment checks, those weren't going out anymore. So our incomes actually are still elevated compared to that previous high that we saw in February. People are, believe it or not, earning more money now. A lot of this was due to extraordinary government support. I won't ignore that fact, but this didn't just mitigate the decline. That help from the federal government, it didn't just make up some losses, it actually put us into an outright gaining position. That's critical here. Because not only were people earning more, but they just couldn't go out and spend it, right? In April, when we all got those checks, you couldn't get on a plane. You couldn't go out to eat to spend it. You really had a very limited subset of ways that even if you wanted to spend that money, that you could do so. So online shopping shot up maybe, or these other kind of things you could do from home. Maybe home repairs, that really saw a lot of gains. We're all stuck in our houses, we're seeing the thing we've been meaning to do for years, and maybe we finally get around to doing it, but a lot of that additional money was forced into savings. So our just pure billions of dollars in our pockets, our actual savings in this country, spiked like we have never seen before in the history of this data. The level is still elevated. It came down just a bit, obviously, but still elevated well above historic levels. So our consumers sitting on a cushion, and they're sitting on a lot of pent-up demand. They have that money in their pockets. It can be spent. That is going to be one of the primary factors supporting the robustness of this recovery. Now, I'll talk about GDP. I'll show you some additional charts in a moment, but this is the rate of change for GDP. That's the blue line on this chart. And you see how closely it typically correlates with disposable income. This shouldn't be a surprise. 2/3 of GDP is driven by consumer spending. So there should be a very close logical relationship between these two lines, and we see that historically until COVID. And look at the two just completely diverge. They're starting to come back, right, but in different directions. So we do expect them to come back together, but that spike in the green line, especially once you consider the savings impact, that is really a strong sign for GDP. That's what's supporting us here in the near term. And in fact, if we look at GDP, we've already turned the corner. I have just quarterly data, so again, keep in mind, the quarterly moves a little quicker. It's a little more responsive than if we average things out on an annual basis. No joke that we saw COVID really sharp decline in the second quarter. We see that huge gap, kind of that missing bar in the data. But look what happened in the third quarter. We came back, we made up so much of those losses, not quite above water yet, so it will take us more time to crawl out of that